Most people think vaping is simply breathing in harmless water vapor. But the moment that first puff enters your lungs, your body reacts in ways you cannot see or feel. Tiny air sacs designed to exchange oxygen are suddenly exposed to a heated cloud of chemicals and microscopic particles. Within seconds, your lungs, bloodstream, and brain begin responding. These changes happen long before you notice a cough or shortness of breath. So, what is really happening inside your body with every inhale? Let's follow the journey of a single puff to uncover the answer. What happens when you take the first puff? The moment you inhale, a battery-powered heating coil turns e-liquid into an aerosol. Although it is often called vapor, it is actually a cloud of tiny liquid droplets mixed with gases and microscopic particles. These particles travel through your mouth, down the trachea, also known as the windpipe, and into branching airways that become smaller and smaller until they reach millions of tiny air sacs called alveoli. These air sacs are where oxygen normally moves into the bloodstream. Because their walls are extremely thin, nicotine quickly passes through them and enters nearby blood vessels. Within seconds, it reaches the brain and attaches to receptors that normally respond to a natural chemical called acetylcholine. This triggers the release of dopamine, a neurotransmitter that creates feelings of reward and satisfaction, making repeated use more likely. At the same time, immune cells inside the lungs recognize many of the incoming particles as foreign material and begin responding. But what exactly are these particles carrying? How vape aerosol travels through your lungs. The aerosol follows the same path as the oxygen you breathe, but its microscopic particles behave differently. Larger droplets settle in the upper airways, while smaller ones travel deep into the bronchioles and eventually reach the alveoli. Your lungs have a built-in cleaning system made of sticky mucus and tiny hair-like structures called cilia. Mucus traps dust and harmful particles, while the cilia continuously sweep that mucus toward the throat so it can be removed. Research suggests that repeated exposure to vape aerosol can slow the movement of these cilia and make mucus more difficult to clear. As a result, irritating particles may remain inside the airways longer than normal, increasing the risk of coughing and airway irritation. The journey of the aerosol explains where it goes, but to understand its effects, we need to examine what it contains. What's actually inside vape liquid? Most vape liquids contain propylene glycol, vegetable glycerin, flavoring chemicals, and often nicotine. Although some of these ingredients are approved for use in food, inhaling heated chemicals into the lungs is very different from eating them. When the liquid is heated, new compounds can form, including small amounts of chemicals such as formaldehyde and acetaldehyde, particularly at very high temperatures. Some devices may also release tiny metal particles from their heating coils. The exact chemicals produced depend on the device, the liquid, and how it is used. Nicotine also affects the body beyond the lungs. It stimulates the release of adrenaline, a hormone that temporarily increases heart rate, raises blood pressure, and narrows blood vessels. Meanwhile, the lungs continue facing repeated exposure to heated particles with every breath. So how do they respond? How vaping affects your lungs. Your lungs are designed to exchange oxygen while protecting delicate tissue from harmful substances. When heated aerosol repeatedly reaches the airways, lung cells release chemical signals that activate the immune system. This protective response is called inflammation. Inflammation helps remove unwanted particles, but repeated exposure can keep this response active. Research also suggests that vaping increases oxidative stress, a process in which unstable molecules called free radicals build up faster than the body's natural defenses can remove them. Over time, these molecules can damage lung cells and make the airways more sensitive. Some people develop coughing, throat irritation, chest discomfort, or increased mucus production, while others may not notice symptoms even though changes are occurring inside their lungs. Current evidence also suggests that regular vaping can reduce normal lung function and increases the risk of respiratory symptoms, although scientists are still studying its long-term effects. So far, we've focused only on the lungs, but nicotine and other chemicals don't stay there. Within moments, they travel through your bloodstream, reaching organs throughout your body. What happens next may surprise you. Can vaping affect other parts of your body? Once nicotine enters the bloodstream through the lungs, it spreads throughout the body within seconds. One of its first targets is the brain, where it stimulates the release of dopamine, creating a temporary feeling of pleasure. At the same time, it also triggers the release of adrenaline, a hormone that prepares the body for action. This causes your heart to beat faster, raises blood pressure, and narrows blood vessels. Repeated nicotine exposure can affect the cardiovascular system by placing extra strain on the heart and blood vessels. It can also influence the developing brain of teenagers and young adults, making nicotine addiction more likely. Although the lungs receive the first exposure, the effects of vaping are not limited to the respiratory system. This raises an important question: how does vaping compare with traditional smoking? Vaping versus smoking. Which is worse for your lungs? Cigarette smoke is created by burning tobacco, producing thousands of chemicals, including tar, carbon monoxide, and many known cancer-causing substances. Because vaping does not involve combustion, users are generally exposed to fewer of these toxic chemicals. However, fewer harmful chemicals does not mean harmless. Vape aerosol still contains nicotine, fine particles, flavoring chemicals, and substances formed during heating that can irritate the lungs. Current evidence suggests that cigarette smoking causes greater overall damage to lung health, but regular vaping can still increase inflammation, affect normal lung function, and increase the risk of respiratory symptoms. The healthiest choice for your lungs is to avoid both. But if someone quits vaping, can the lungs recover? Can your lungs heal after you quit vaping? The lungs have a remarkable ability to repair themselves. Once vaping stops, they are no longer exposed to repeated heated aerosols, allowing normal healing processes to begin. Over time, the tiny cilia lining the airways can recover, improving the lungs' ability to remove mucus and trapped particles. As inflammation decreases, many people notice less coughing, easier breathing, and improved exercise tolerance. Recovery depends on how long a person vaped, how often they used it, and whether they also smoked cigarettes. While some changes may improve, scientists are still studying whether certain long-term effects can be completely reversed. Even so, quitting gives the lungs the best opportunity to recover. Common myths about vaping and lung health. One of the biggest myths is that vaping produces only harmless water vapor. In reality, it creates an aerosol containing microscopic particles, chemicals, and often nicotine. Another common belief is that flavored vapes are safer because they taste like fruit or mint. But flavoring chemicals that are safe to eat are not automatically safe to inhale into the lungs, and researchers continue studying their long-term effects. Some people also believe that if they do not cough or feel short of breath, vaping is not affecting their lungs. However, inflammation and cellular stress can develop before noticeable symptoms appear. Feeling healthy does not always mean the lungs are free from damage. So after following a single puff through the body, what does the scientific evidence actually tell us? The bottom line: is vaping really safe for your lungs? Current scientific evidence does not support the idea that vaping is safe for the lungs. Although it generally exposes users to fewer harmful chemicals than cigarette smoking, it still delivers heated aerosols that can irritate the airways, trigger inflammation, increase oxidative stress, and affect normal lung function. Regular vaping also increases the risk of respiratory symptoms, while scientists continue studying its long-term health effects. For adults who already smoke cigarettes, completely switching to regulated e-cigarettes may reduce exposure to many harmful chemicals compared with continuing to smoke. However, this should not be interpreted as vaping being safe, especially for people who have never smoked, or for young people whose developing brains are more vulnerable to nicotine addiction. Your lungs are built to work with clean air, and every breath supports the oxygen supply that keeps your entire body alive. The closer that air remains to its natural state, the better your lungs can perform the job they were designed to do.